Hello Horror Hounds, welcome to my horror house. My journey through the films of the Conjuring franchise takes me to The Curse of La Llorona, the only film in the franchise that I had never seen before, intended to be a stealth entry into the Conjuring universe. It's now sort of been quietly pushed over into the corner, and the other films don't really talk about it and certainly don't talk to it at parties. My overriding feeling, having watched it for the first time, and especially having watched some of the brief extra materials behind the scenes stuff on the Blu-ray, is one of disappointment and feeling just a little bit sorry for a lot of the people involved. There seems to have been a lot of goodwill towards the project that I feel ultimately went unfulfilled. On paper, I'm all for this kind of experimentation to expand the universe. The idea of releasing a horror movie, not announcing that it's part of the franchise, and then hopefully creating some sort of online buzz about it as the penny drops and people who go and watch it realise, and then maybe get more people interested to come and see it, is certainly an interesting approach, and it could have worked with a better project. I like the idea of having other stories told here that don't have to tie in directly to the Warrens or the artifacts in the Warrens' house. They don't have to be Annabelle related. We have the most minimal amount of crossover here. A priest character who was in Annabelle appears in The Curse of La Llorona and sort of alludes to that prior case and the Warrens, but ultimately the family under the curse seek help from another direction, so it doesn't become sort of Ed and Lorraine Warren adjacent. Why not? We've already established that there are demons and the forces of good and all sorts of supernatural shenanigans out there, cursed items and the like. So it would be feasible to have more of these stories set out in the wider Conjuring world. I just think that the sort of abject failure, sort of critically and commercially, of this movie has probably nipped that in the bud, which is why we're going to be seeing more nuns and more Annabelles and more Ed and Lorraine Warrens. And probably that's about it. The reason I'm so sort of mopey with how it all turned out is that a lot of the actors in the behind the scenes interviews were really jazzed that this Mexican folklore was being brought to the big screen. This the story of La Llorona, the Weeping Woman, is a well-known Mexican fable and folklore. Tons of the sort of Latin American actors that are in this movie were telling about how they had heard stories of the Weeping Woman as just children, as a sort of boogeyman in Mexican folklore, and they were really psyched that her story was being told. And I think it's a great freaking story. The story of a woman who is betrayed by her husband, and in a fit of absolute grief and anger wants to get back at him in the most personal and despicable way possible by taking from him the things he loves most in the world, their children. She drowns her own children, and then realizing what she's done, she drowns herself and is now cursed to walk the earth, taking other people's children as replacements, taking and drowning them. You know, behave or La Llorona will get you. And they seem so psyched that this story is going to be told, and as they should be. But then you have an interview with the director who says, sort of as though it's the most obvious thing in the world, so what we wanted to do is we wanted to bring in a family who aren't part of that community and who don't know about the legend, because everyone in the Mexican community knows about the legend of La Llorona. So we want to bring in this family who knows nothing about it, and then they sort of come face to face with that evil. Why? Absolutely, why would you do that? And what you get is the story of a bog standard white American family whose children are now under threat from being sort of snatched by this Mexican folklore figurehead icon of the weeping woman. But why not set it in the Mexican community? Just because everyone is raised with stories from childhood, it doesn't mean that your reaction to it, if it turns out to be real, would be any different or any less interesting. Why not set it in this really rich Latin community that has deep roots with the church, and then beyond that with their folklore and their heritage, and once the church can't help them, they look for help outside the church, and you can play with all of that luscious, glorious imagery and all the wonderful heritage that these actors were really excited to bring to the screen. And instead, what you get is a pretty cookie cutter white bread family trying to survive through an absolutely cookie cutter jump scare, nothing of a movie. And it just seems that the potential for all that heritage and tradition was jettisoned, and that was a mistake. La Llorona becomes a figure absolutely akin to the nun, someone who sort of turns up and boo scares you, and that is about it. There are a couple of times when they kind of play quite nicely with the idea that her wedding dress that she's dressed in, like some sort of entity, Miss Havisham. There are a couple of times when the net curtains could be the hem of her dress, or what turns out to be her dress is the net curtains in the background, and then her hands come down into shot in the back, and that's quite creepy. But yeah, they use the net curtains twice. I suppose 3 times would be a bit too much, but introducing her in creepy ways like that. I was minded of the old TV adaptation from the 70s, I think, of the Woman in Black, and how that entity was sort of peppered throughout the screen, often in the distance, and sort of slowly coming closer as the story was told, until we get one absolutely fabulous scare for the ages, rather than this tired old sort of clunky roller coaster of scares that made me honestly feel like that films like this are intended to be horror movies for people who don't go and watch horror movies a lot at the cinema, which is fine. Oh, cool, you know, a new Conjuring movie is coming out. Let's go and get our scares from that, and we probably won't watch another horror movie for another 2 or 3 years. And that's fine if it's made for people like that, and they get their kicks out of it and like it. That's cool. But if you have seen an awful lot of horror movies, so as some of us have, it's just more of the same. Yet another sort of uninspired and lackluster thing. There's no digging into the glorious potential of the iconography that the Catholic Church provides here. You have the sort of ultimate mother icon in Mary, and you have in this figure of La Llorona this sort of like inverted symbol of motherhood, a mother who has done one of the most unimaginable things possible and killed her own children. And in the middle of that, you would have our living, breathing flesh mother caught in between these two extremes. You could play around with all of that, but instead what you get is a scenario where La Llorona gets stabbed in the heart with a wooden cross, which is just such a ham-fisted way of dealing with things, when you could have had some weighty thematic resonance going on there, but there's none of it. It's an absolute waste of potential, and I feel really bad for all the actors who were so happy that this folktale from their childhood was coming to the big screen, only to be absolutely squandered in what I think is a predictable, tissue-thin echo of an echo of what I imagine that original folk tale is. So no wonder really that the Curse of La Llorona doesn't really have a seat at the Conjuring table and has just sort of quietly been put to one side and forgotten about, because for this viewer, ladies and gentlemen, it is not a good film.
I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.